You're very welcome to Belturbet Community Project. My name is George Morrissey. I've been involved with this project since 1994. This is a railway heritage project which is owned and managed by Belturbet Community, and volunteering has always played a big part in the running and the success of this project. This building was built by the Great Northern Railway Ireland, and it is the only one of its kind on the entire system built of cut stone, which the stone was sourced from the River Aire a few hundred yards from my left. And a fine example of the stonemason's art is in the station master's house, the two-storey building at the end of the line here. The station was opened for business in 1885, and the line ran from Belturbet, which was its southern terminus, all the way out through Clonus, Monaghan, Armagh, Portadown, Lisburn, Belfast, and all the way north to the port of Larne. At Clonus, the line diverted up to Bundoran via Newtown Butler, Lisnaskea and Enniskillen. Bundoran, of course, being a beautiful holiday resort. Many special trains called excursions were ran up there by the Great Northern in the summertime. Nearer to home, 4 mile out at Ballyhaise, the line diverted again, this time up to Cavan, and on the way into Cavan it stopped to serve the Loretta College. At Cavan Station, connections could be made to Dublin in the east and indeed to all of the west of Ireland. The coming of the railways brought great prosperity to Belturbet. At that time, it is recorded that the town of Belturbet was the best town, the best market town in any of the 3 surrounding counties. 25 people were employed permanently here on this site by the Great Northern. It was a very much sought after job, as the wages and conditions were considered to be very good, and it also came with a very smart uniform which most of its staff wore with great pride. In 1887, the famous Cavan and Leitrim narrow gauge arrived on the west side of this station. It was 33 miles long and it ran on a 3-foot wide gauge. The purpose of the Cavan and Leitrim was to open up West Cavan and to access the very valuable coal and iron ore that lay on the shores of Lough Allen in County Roscommon. The Cavan and Leitrim was the only narrow gauge to stay with steam all through its history. All of the others changed over to diesel. The reason that the Cavan and Leitrim lasted longer than most other of the railways, particularly in this area, was because of the importance of the coal that would lay at Arigna. During the war in particular, that coal became hugely important to this state because it was virtually the only coal seams we had, and it was necessary to have coal to run companies like Drogheda Cement and all the various foundries down the south of Ireland, like Pierce Plows, people who were manufacturing horse-drawn plows and horse-drawn mowing machines. All our coal supplies had been cut off during the war. You will see some examples of those plows and mowing machines as you progress your tour. When I was 12 years old, I travelled on the Great Northern steam train with my father twice, and on both occasions it was to Clonus. The first trip was to attend an Ulster final in Clonus. That alone was huge excitement, not just the match, but the travelling on the train there and back was hugely exciting, especially for a 12-year-old. On the other occasion, we took 2 greyhounds belonging to my father to the greyhound racing track at Clonus. And just in mentioning travel, I think we should remember the people who travelled, walked here and travelled before us. Many of them heading for parts unknown. Thousands of immigrants passed through this station, many of them from Leitrim, Roscommon, and further afield up into the west. They came down on the narrow gauge to this station and they transferred onto the Great Northern, headed out for the port of Dublin or Belfast, and headed for parts unknown. Some of them, like my Uncle George, headed out from here and went to Australia, never to return, as many of them in those far-off days didn't and couldn't. But it's sobering to think that the last sight that these immigrants saw of their native place was this railway station. And indeed, it could have been demolished quite so easily. Thankfully, it's here to stay. The death knell for both companies here was the decision by the Éire government to build a coal-fired power station on the shores of Lough Allen. This power station would absorb all of the output from Arigna mines, and therefore the coal trains would no longer be running down to Belturbet for transshipping out to the south of Ireland. The station closed finally on March 1959. The place became then used for the grazing of cattle. Dereliction set in, neglect set in, vandalism set in, the place was set on fire, and for the next 40 years it just deteriorated. In 1994, Belturbet Community Development Association purchased the site for the community. We set about restoring this beautiful station and to create a state-of-the-art tourist and community centre and amenity area, which indeed is what it has become. We have achieved much here, but we still have an awful long way to go. If you will kindly pass through this door, Joan, our guide, will take over and she will guide you for the next part of your tour, which I hope you will enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Welcome to the main reception area. My name is Joan. I have been a volunteer for the last 10 years with the Belturbet Community Railway. We have a leaflet with a plan, and each area of importance is numbered. For example, we are number 1 and number 2. We are now in the reception and waiting room area. On restoration around the 1999, this area, it was decided not to restore the waiting room wall, which actually had been demolished while the site remained derelict for over 40 years. Cattle used this area as a shelter. And also another item here that was not in the original plan is the counter. This counter we acquired after the filming of the Run of the Country in Red Hills in 1885, and from that period on we had the public, when they came into this reception area, they went straight to the window to purchase their ticket. They chose to either have a first-class ticket or a second-class ticket. The women that bought a first-class ticket in fact had their own waiting room, which is further down the platform. Also included an ensuite and other facilities. Again, we are very privileged to have this museum setting within, our museum items within this museum, within an old station. For example, we have again the story and history of the Cavan and Leitrim Railway. Within the display, we have many items of great interest. To include but a few, there's the GNR staff, there's telegram form, and a variety of tickets used during that period. The GNR staff was collected from the signal box by the train driver, and this was a safety device which ensured that no other train was on the line, and obviously preventing a train crash. And I'll tell you, if the train driver did not have that staff when he arrived, he was in big trouble. Nearby we have also the telegram form. The telegram form and telegrams were sent from the railway station, and they had a room further down the platform, and it was a big means of communication those days. And then the various variety of tickets include amongst them one where a person was leaving the Irish shores, immigrating by train and going on its train steerage, taking the ship to Glasgow. And also it includes a military on leave from World War I. As we mentioned, the telegram for messages and communication, we now have the manual telephone exchange that was used in the post office. This was donated to us from Red Hills Post Office when it closed down and before communications became automatic. Donated also from the Duke of Abercorn is the ship's wheel. Again, we have the centre area, which is the original brass plate from the SS Belturbet. The steamship Belturbet was another choice of travel when people came off the train. And if they wished to travel on by train or use the steamship, they had a choice on their trip to Enniskillen. They walked down the street to the Kilkenny Quay, and there moored at the quay was the steamship Belturbet, and it also carried about 100 passengers with cargo, including whisky from the local distillery. This map shows the route of the Cavan and Leitrim narrow gauge railway. It started its journey from Belturbet and moved on along these different areas. It finished in County Leitrim at Killiran and began its journey at Garradice in County Leitrim, where at Ballinamore it split between travelling on to Drummond Station or going to the Arigna coal mine in County Roscommon. We have a wonderful display of photos, the courtesy of the Cavan Library, which shows all the stations, railway crossings and engines of the Cavan and Leitrim Railway. Again, we have a great collection of what we call rolling stock, which means the engines and carriages that they used during their time. And again, talking about rolling stock, I will now hand you over to Una, who will speak further on rolling stock. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. This is an example of a convertible goods wagon which was used on the Cavan and Leitrim narrow gauge railway to transport either cattle or goods. A section of the roof was removed and replaced with a canvas shawl, which was then rolled back when it was used to transport cattle. The cattle needed ventilation. It became known as a shawly wagon, and there were several of these on the Cavan and Leitrim railway used, especially on market days. This model was made by Damien O'Brien from Ballinamore. He presented it as a project for his Leaving Cert woodworking exam that year. It was 1987. Inside, part of the flooring has been left exposed to show the great workmanship used in the construction of the very strong foundation. Thank you. If you move outside, Sam will talk to you about some of the items out on the platform.
Hello everybody, my name is Sam O'Keefe. I'm now going to bring you on our next section of our tour. We're now standing on the Great Northern Railway platform, and as we know, there was two companies in Belturbet at that particular time. The Cavan and Leitrim Railway was also here. Now going to tell you about different types of offices, and these doors are leading onto the platform. So what I'm going to just tell you now is what goes on behind the doors. On my right hand side here, I have the station master's office. So in that office, he was doing all his general work in there. He didn't have very far to go to work, would you believe? And the reason I'm saying that is that it's actually adjoined to his sitting room. So he comes out of his sitting room straight into the office. The door beside that then is the ticket office. That's where they issue the tickets from into the reception area. So the next door we have then is the reception area, exit and entrance doors, and it's in this area that you get your ticket from. So moving further on down then, we have the general waiting room. So on a cold day, the fireplace would be lit inside with a nice glowing fire in it. And then beside that, we have the telegram room and postal room. And inside that room, they also held the lanterns that was used on the railway at that particular time. So the next door then adjoining to that is the VIP ladies first class ticket holders would be in that room. And in there we have also, at that time, there was an ensuite to that room. And then of course at the very end then we have the ladies' toilets and the gents' toilets. And I'm now going to show you one of the cubicles that's actually in there, which is very interesting. Okay folks, so we're now standing in the gents' toilets, and here we can see a normal cubicle where you have a normal toilet in it that we know of as today. And in this cubicle here, we have a toilet where you stand up to actually go to the toilet. And I've never seen this type of toilet in any other building in my life. But it was operated then in those days when the station opened in 1885. The toilets would have been, some of them would have looked like that. Okay folks, now as I said, this is the last stop for the Great Northern Railway train. It pulled in here, and on its outward journey, it travelled from Belturbet to Red Hills, and from Red Hills to Ballyhaise. Now in Ballyhaise it had a small junction that diverted the train in two different ways. One was to Clonus and it led on to Monaghan, and then to the eastern side it went from Ballyhaise to Cavan Town, and Cavan Town then on to Kells, Navan and Dublin. So it was a busy little station in its day, and the reason for that is that you had the fair days on the last week of every month, and it meant that the town was very busy. So there was lots of cattle and things like that to be transshipped on the train. You could have had maybe 2 to 3 trains on those particular days that the fair day was on, and maybe 2 trains then on other days, on other weeks. But the gauge itself, the track itself is 5 foot 3 inches in width, known as the broad gauge. The Cavan and Leitrim line, as I mentioned, that there was 2 companies. The Cavan and Leitrim line was 3 foot in width, so it was a lot smaller than the broad gauge. A typical trip that the Great Northern would put on, a special trip every now and again, a typical trip would be from Dublin to Cavan, down to Ballyhaise and into Belturbet. And from here, the passengers would get off on Belturbet and travel by either horse and cart, taxi type, or before 1959, it would have been in a car. And they would have travelled from the railway station to the far side of Belturbet, which is the northern side on the River Erne. There we had a steamboat known as Steamship Belturbet, and it would bring the passengers further on down to Knockninny and on to Inniskillen. So they were in the north of Ireland then, and they were able to do their shopping. Now the ship itself was able to hold 174 passengers, and it also brought barrels of whiskey on its trip, and that was from the distillery in Belturbet, which is also here. So now I'll just tell you about the different types of transportation that it was needed for. It had goods, it transported goods, mail. It also transported coal from Origna mines, and it also transported passengers. Now, it was vital that the train came to Belturbet, and that was the reason why that they came, was because Origna mines was producing coal at that stage, and there was a lot of coal came from Belturbet and distributed then to Dublin, and the reason for that was to help to generate the electricity generators throughout Ireland, and it also generated power for the cement factories. So back in the Second World War, the station here would have been very busy because there was a lot of coal transshipped from Belturbet at that particular time. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about the rolling stock that we have here, and I'll tell you a little about each individual piece. Right, here we have a Ruston's diesel engine. This engine was sourced by the committee back in the mid-1990s when they were refurbishing the railway. It's a Ruston's engine. The engine can be got going. There's actually oil in it. It was owned by a sugar company down in Mallow in County Cork, and it was a shunting engine. So it was brought to here to put on display for the committee to give people an idea what it was like to have a train or an engine in at the platform. But someday we hope to get this engine going and the actual piece moving. So it's quite heavy actually. It's 17 ton in weight, and so it's quite heavy engine. But look, it can be going, and we will certainly get it going in the future. The next thing what I'm going to do then is I'm going to move on then to our passenger carriage. This passenger carriage is 62 foot long. It was an original passenger carriage, but it was taken apart to what you see it today, and it's used as a display area for us. On the passenger carriage then we have two-wheel buggies here on the platform. This was used by the men to repair the track itself, so it was track maintenance that it was used for. And this particular piece here can be taken apart, so they took it apart at some stages while the train was coming. So they took it off the track and rebuilt it when the train was gone past, and continued on with the work. On this as well we have jacks. These jacks were used if the engine, God forbid, was derailed or anything like that, and some of them had derailed with the Cavan and Leitrim line, and they would use the jacks here to jack up the engine and get it back on track. This item here that we have here is for changing the tracks themselves, and to do that you pull the lever and it led the train onto a different track, to a different section of the railway. So now I'm going to just move on further down and I'll explain other parts that's on it. Here we have what was known as a cow catcher, this piece here. Now, it didn't actually catch cows, and where the name came from I honestly do not know, but it was on the front of the Cavan and Leitrim engine. And back in the days, the farmers of course would have some of their cattle grazing on the sides of the track, known as the long acre. That's what the farmer would use, or would say. So this was on the front of the engine, and it was used to push the cattle physically off the track, would you believe? So that's what it is, and that's exactly, it's not a replica, it's an actual part that was used in those days. So okay, now we'll move on down. And we have here some railway gates. These railway gates were used or taken from an area where there was a rail crossing on a road at a junction. And a man would be there to open and close the gates to let the train through. They were located in a hedge not too far from our station here at the moment. And some of the committee had spotted it and had an awful job actually to try and get it out of the ditch that it was in. But they were in fierce bad repair. And recently we had them taken into the platform here to keep it in out of the elements of weather. And some of the committee has painted them and brought them up to what they originally would have looked like on the day. So they were the gates. We have 2 of those. They will be put out again in the future. There is a crossing that we're going to have to use when we're developed the station further on, and the gates will be used again to what they were originally meant for. So hopefully that will happen. Okay, so now I'm going to move on down then to what is known as the brake wagon. This brake wagon is 30 tons in weight, and it was used for at the back end of the train. And the reason that it was there and its function was to steady the train. Steady the train and slow it down coming into a corner or coming to a stop. This was a heavy weight at the back of the train. And it was operated by a guard known as the station guard. And believe it or not, my grandfather, Patrick O'Keefe, would have operated a wagon very similar to this. Not this one, but one very similar in this station. He was the station guard here in Belturbet. And out of 7 of his sons, 5 of his sons worked on the railway. And one of those sons was my dad. So I would be the 3rd generation to be involved in the railway, which is very personal to me. But again, as I say, the guard's wagon, and on the end here you can see, or midway down, there was a window there for the guard to look out. So he would know when the corner was coming up and the train needed to be steady coming to the corner. It was also used for carrying mail and other items. It also had a little stove inside to keep the guard warm at times. And there was also a brake wheel inside to turn when to put on the brakes on the wagon. So that's basically what it was used for. And then you can see at the ends of each carriage there's known as buffers. These would be when the train was linking up to each other and there was actual big chain links used to secure each wagon to each other. Okay folks, here we have a newer type of engine. This is a Ruston's Hornsby engine, and it was sourced up in Donegal from Bordnamona. Our committee had seen that it was up for sale and we moved in on it fairly quickly and bought it. The engine is actually going on it. There's a few other pieces that needs to be repaired. But in the future, we will have this on track and moving on the railway to bring visitors around. So it was vital that we wouldn't let it go. It was very important that we got it to Belturbet. And of course we got it at a good price, so we were very lucky in that. But that's our future thing there. So, okay, we'll move on then to the next little piece. Right, here we have numerous tools. I am not going to go through the whole lot because there is so many. But you can have a look around yourselves and examine them, and the names are on them actually. But just briefly, we have shovels that was used to clean out the ashes from the steam engines all those years ago. We have an old toilet here, an old toilet bowl that dates back to 1836 or something like that, I think it is. I'm not quite sure on that. We also have levers, change levers. We have the tops of electricity poles that are on the ground, but have a look and you'll be able to see them yourselves. There's also poles with hooks on the end of them that were used to link the chain onto each carriage that are on the end of this. So that's it. Have a look at that anyway, and the names are on them and you'll be able to have a good look and examine them yourself. Now I want to move on now to the coal hutch here. This is the type of coal hutch that was used in Arigna mines back in the day, and we were delighted that the men in Arigna mines that used to work in Arigna mines has made this coal hutch for us. So those men that worked in it in those days, in the 50s, are now tour guides in the Arigna mines. But they made this for us, which we were delighted. So this would have been pushed in and out of the mine on the day. So we're delighted to have that. That is brilliant. So now here we are at the crossover platform. And at the crossover platform we have the Cavan and Leitrim rail would have been in there. So the tracks would have been in that particular spot there. And believe it or not, there was 2 tracks in there, which meant that there was 2 trains parked in there. It doesn't look like that now because it's so narrow, but on the day there was 2 trains literally in there. So remember what I said, the width of the tracks were 3 foot wide. So that's what was in that side. And then on the other side here we have the Great Northern Railway track was running along the platform on that side there. And it was 5 foot 3 inches in width, known as the wide gauge. So why is a crossover platform? 2 companies, 2 trains. People coming from this train here would walk across the platform and get on to the Great Northern there and head off in the directions that I told you while I was inside, to Dublin or Monaghan, either way. And for the Cavan and Leitrim, the Cavan and Leitrim train went from Belturbet to Ballyconnell, and from Ballyconnell to Ballinamore, and from Ballinamore up into Drummond, and then further on to Arigna mines, which I also had mentioned inside, again to take the coal. They had passenger wagons on the train, and there was a lot of coal wagons on it. And another member will explain the piece about the coal and where it went to on the station here later on. But this is what I wanted to show you. This is where the last train that pulled out of Belturbet in 1959. It showed some of the photographs inside in a reception area where the people were standing on the platform, but this is the actual platform now that you're looking at, where the last people had pulled out on that day. So now we'll move on a little bit further. Okay, so now on the platform here we had electricity lights. So there would have been 2 at this point here and a little bit further on. And as I said, the Great Northern was on that side and the Cavan and Leitrim trains were on that side. And then further on down the platform here, what we're leading to is the goods store. The goods store was used by the Cavan and Leitrim company only. The Great Northern Railway did not move any further than the end of this platform here. That was its last stop, was Belturbet. But as I said, this train here moved on further afield and up into County Leitrim. It was a very slow train, believe it or not. And on one of our videos that we noticed was the track ran along the sides of the roads in some particular places. And one guy actually, believe it or not, got off the train, ran in front of it up the road, stopped and took a picture while the train was still moving, and then got back onto the train again. So that'll show you what it was like in those days. It was the real slow train, as the slow train to China, as we know in the phrase that we use. So this is basically it, folks. Thank you very much for listening to me. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand you over to our next tour guide, whose name is Tony. Thank you again.
Thank you, Sam. So I'm Tony, and glad to have you here. And we are now at the Cavan and Leitrim narrow gauge goods store. And this is where the trains would have come in from this direction here, from Ballyconnell, come in here, and you can see the track would have ran along the door here, which was very convenient for taking out the goods. So the goods were all taken in here into the goods store, and from there you can imagine at the back of the goods store a line of horses and carts all waiting to take the goods away. And they would take the goods and distribute them. They would take them to all the local towns and villages in the county. And that was good for so many people. You can imagine would have been waiting on these things to come through. So the railway was a huge asset when you think about it. Now you're looking here at a stretch here where that went up onto the main road, and they had a track there, and the train would run on up there and take the wagons to that point where you might have some huge boxes and heavy items, and they had a hoist up there on the edge of the main road, and the boxes would be all taken off at that point. So that's how all of this worked here now, yes. So now we are at the water tower. This was the Cavan and Leitrim water tower, which you see here, and there would have been a huge tank on the top of that building, and that's where the water would have been held, and the tank that would feed the engine, and that would leave it then possible to travel back home. It needed that water in the steam, with the steam engine, to get back, make its journey back over to Drummond, which is a journey of about 33 miles from here. So that's how that worked, the water tower, yeah. Okay, so now we're at the transshipment shed. As you can see here behind me, it's like a huge hay shed, but an awful lot of work went on here, and heavy work. So the train would have come up here with the wagons of cattle and coal from a loop line, from the main line. It would have come up this way here, and the men would have set in, and the cattle would have had to be herded across the tracks here onto the Great Northern side. The Great Northern tracks run here, so the wagons would be waiting there, and the cattle would be herded into those wagons, and then they would be shipped off to places like Belfast and Dublin, to the markets there. That was a huge part of the business, and that was that part of it. So then the coal, which was the biggest part of all, you could have 10 wagons of coal waiting here, and they would have to be unloaded and then brought across into the wagons here in the Great Northern side. So you can imagine there was huge work involved here, and that was all done by the use of wheelbarrows and shovels and planks. So there were wonderful men in their time, they really were. So they'd done that day in, day out, and there was one day of note when actually 300 tons of coal came through here. So you can imagine. Now, one thing about it is that it actually extended the life of the railway here by about 6 years by virtue of handling the coal. It was so crucial to industry. One important stop along the way was the Drogheda cement plant, and they needed a huge amount of coal every day for the furnace. So the trains would be coming from Mohill. They could visit the railway here maybe 6 times per day. That's it. Now that's the story of this part. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Żaneta, and I would like to show you a little bit of the railway station that I really like. Maybe first of all, I would like you to imagine this place back in time. Let's say 100 years ago. Here you can at the moment you can hear the birds singing. There's no any noises. It was nothing like that 100 years ago. Not at all. This area was covered with, it was a network of tracks. On the right, it was a very busy passenger platform that was accommodating 2 lines, the broad gauge and the narrow gauge, so Great Northern Railway and the Cavan and Leitrim. Forward on my left, it was a transshipment shed, another super busy place they were mostly transshipping coal from Arigna. So if you close your eyes and imagine all the noises and all the people and everything that was happening here, it was extremely busy place. Just in front of me is a turntable, which was it was a kind of spinning monster-sized plate that was turning the big engine, and the building just behind me is a so-called engine shed. The engine shed was a servicing building. You wouldn't say so because it's a really lovely building. The building it's made of cut stone, and how we know it's a servicing building because of the size of the door, obviously. The turntable was linked with the tracks to the engine shed. So if there was any problem with the big engine, or they just wanted to get rid of the ashes, that was the place where it was done, and we can easily spot it. There is a servicing pit running in the center all along the engine shed, and there is also the construction of the roof is ready to. There is a vent running all along the roof for the steam extraction. Everything is very exciting, but I think you'll be more excited with the real treasure that we hid inside, because inside we have royal carriage. I am standing in a royal carriage now, and you really need to see the interior of it. You can still see the wealth. The carriage itself had the gas light and heated seats, and it had windows to make a super comfort for the royal visitors. The royal carriage was Wexford, Limerick and Western Railway's family saloon number 900, manufactured in 1891. The carriage was used as a royal saloon in 1897 to transport the Duke and Duchess of York from Limerick to Killaloe and Adare during the occasion of one of their visits to Ireland. The Duke of York was later to become George V on the death of Edward VII in 1910. The royal carriage was also used by the Great Southern and Western Railway for the visit of King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra in 1903. The royal carriage itself was withdrawn from the service about 1960. As I said, you can still see the wealth of it. The door provided was very comfortable. They gave a great option to observation. And it was a toilet at the end. There's a sink still there. We intend to restore the royal carriage, as it's really worth to be restored and to be brought to its majestic original view.
So here we go for our next part of our tour, and this is called the turntable. And the reason that it's called the turntable is that the train actually came onto the middle of this circle, and it was able to be turned around. And in the middle here you had a big mechanism of wheels and cogs, and it was all made of solid steel and iron, and it was that well greased that one man could actually spin the actual engine round on his own. But if you look at the actual circumference of it, the stone had to be handmade, hand carved, because they're actually in a perfect circle. Now again, the stone here would have been sourced from the River Erne, just like the buildings that are stone from behind me, as was mentioned earlier in the tour. all of this stone was sourced from the River Erne at the time. So the engine would come on to here, it would be spun around and turned in the opposite direction. So you can imagine it'd be very hard to turn a train if you didn't have this. How would you turn it? There would be no way of turning the train around the opposite way. So this is how they did it. It was so well greased and so well maintained that one man was able to do it. This would have been near enough the exact spot where the turntable would have been initially. We weren't 100% sure, but I'd say 93% sure that this is where it was. Okay, that's it, folks. So we'll move on now to our next stage of our tour, and I'll be handing then over to our next tour guide called George. Thank you very much.
The building that was behind me originally was the Great Northern Railway goods store. This is where all the goods going in and coming out moved through. Original building was accidentally burned to the ground in 1986. There was nothing left except a couple of half gable end walls. This office behind me, the original had to be demolished. It was so dangerous after the fire. But the irreplaceable loss in that fire was in fact the years of records that were burned and of course lost forever. This horse trough behind me is an original Great Northern Railway Ireland horse trough. All the yards in those days had to have horse troughs in the days of horse and cart to facilitate the horses drinking, and some of the larger stations had in fact 2 or 3 of these on site. As you can see, this building is now totally rebuilt as was, and is now a very, very successful community centre. It's used for many, many purposes, not least of which is the Scouting Ireland, as you can see from the sign on the back of me. On the left-hand side of the building was where the trains, the goods trains, pulled in for loading and unloading. This is the area where one of the 6 lines that went in and out through this yard travelled, because this is where the goods wagons belonging to the Great Northern pulled in alongside this platform here for loading and unloading. This work, all of this heavy work was done by men using heavy steel barrows. As you can see, there's a cantilever building, a cantilever roof over the platform. So when the wagons were pulled in here, everything was done under cover and dry from weather like we're having today. This is the area where goods were wheeled out of the goods store for collection by local shopkeepers and their staff. And this is why this section here and here are squared off the way they are. It was convenient for carts backing right in against it for loading and unloading. The crane on our right hand side here was used for lifting heavy pieces of goods for delivery or indeed collection onto or off the flatbeds on the train, on the goods train. This crane is one that we replaced by an exact same model that was taken away at the time of closure, like so many things were. It's a hand-operated crane and it's still fully operational. This is a very, very modern, very, very efficient heating system for the goods store, and we've had this installed because we just couldn't keep up with the cost of the original underfloor gas heating. We're absolutely delighted with this system. It's saving us a small fortune, maybe even saved us from bankruptcy. This low extension here is what we added on to the original building design when we decided that having restored the goods store to its original state, that we would convert it into a community centre. So we had to add this on for the purpose of creating facilities such as kitchen, toilets, dressing rooms, and at the other end, wheelchair access. We had a very difficult job getting stone to match the old stone that we used on the goods store itself on the rebuilding, but it's all blending in nicely now with the years. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, these windows, which are in fact fire escapes, are the original shape of the doors that hung here in the days when this building was in use as a goods store. And as with keeping with other things on the site, we decided that we would try to keep the original shape. And we did succeed in doing that. This is the original shape of the doors that were here. And the doors that were here are connected with the timbers that are on the wall on both sides of the building. And the reason for those timbers, which of course were burned in the fire, everything was burned, everything, we replaced because those timbers were important to the operating of the doors. And this is where I usually offer the cigar for the winner, to tell me what those timbers were embedded in the wall for, what was the purpose of them. And the purpose of them was that the doors that were very, very heavy single-piece doors, this one here, moved back and forward, slid back and forward, had two wheels screwed into them on the top, and there was a bar running along that timber in the wall, and the wheels on top of the door moved, and the door moved backwards and forward. And it was a very simple but a very, very efficient system of opening and closing what were very, very heavy single doors. This floor level is different than the original. When we put in this floor, we lowered it for different reasons, but the original floor was up on level with the outside platform, and that was to facilitate the movement of the very heavy steel barrows loaded with goods of every description coming in and out. One of the reasons why the fire traveled so fast, and of course it was at night and there wasn't anybody here, nobody knew, everybody was in bed asleep, and the fire ripped through underneath the original floor like a tunnel, because it was mounted on little walls all the way along. This is, of course, the rebuilt office, and this is used by the community for various purposes. During the railway years, monthly cattle fairs were held on the fair green in Belturbet. English buyers arrived in by train, creating great competition amongst the local buyers and butchers. The farmers were the clear winners in this. plus the all-important fact that they no longer had to walk their cattle long distances to market. During the fairs, when the cattle were being purchased, they were penned on the green in 2 separate pens operated by the local council. And in the evening, all the sold cattle that were to be shipped out were rounded up and brought down to the station. They were walked up onto this area, platform, which is called the cattle dock, and the cattle were marched up behind me, and here in front of where I'm standing was the train, the Great Northern cattle train, with empty trucks waiting to load them up for shipping out to Belfast, Dublin or London. Again, it was the farmers that were the clear winners, and this is one of the huge benefits that accrued when the railway came to an area.
Hello, it's Tony here again. I just want to come in at this point and I want to thank everybody who have donated to our GoFundMe page, and we have raised quite an amount of money so far. We're a few months down the road with it, and we want anybody who hasn't donated, please give if you can. We have a target of about 20,000 to cover the cost of the tracks. Board and Mona have allotted us a kilometre of track, and we're saving, putting money together to get that down here at Belturbet. So thanks again everybody, and you can go in on our site. It's the GoFundMe pages under Belturbet Heritage Railway. Thank you very much.